So during this web cafe series, we are focusing on hidden harms in the West Midlands. We are pleased to be partnering with organisations, professionals and survivors based in the West Midlands to look at the harmful practices affecting communities in the area. Also to share any learning around support, best practice and prevention. And we obviously are very grateful to the OPCC in West Midlands for the funding for this series. Today we're going to have an expert that will be talking to us about transnational marriage abandonment. You may hear us using the acronym TMA to refer to it, just because it's simpler than doing the long name. And for those who are not so familiar with the practice, TMA happens when a sponsor, that is usually a spouse or a partner, and with support or not with their family members, abandons their visa-holding spouse or partner abroad. And this happens often without financial resources and with the main aim of preventing them from returning to the UK and accessing support. We usually divide TMA in 3 categories, but today we're going to be focusing on spouses that come to the UK following the marriage, are then abused and taken back to their country of origin, usually through coercion or deception. And we will also want to note that TMA often relies on the collusion of family members and spouses, and therefore sometimes also involves multiple perpetrators. Is usually linked to forms of domestic abuse, very rarely happens in isolation, but it is a form of domestic abuse and has been included in the Domestic Abuse Act last year in January 2024, has a recognition that it is an abusive practice. And without further ado, we are delighted to be joined by Mindy Mahil. I hope I pronounce it correctly, Mindy. And Mindy works for or with the West Midlands Police. Mindy is a retired police officer with extensive experience working on honour-based abuse and forced marriage cases, including repatriating and rescuing girls who were taken abroad for forced marriages. Mindy is also the lead subject matter expert for West Midlands Police on honour-based abuse and forced marriage, and the National Police lead on all related cases. He is the only officer so far in the UK to achieve 2 convictions for forced marriage. We are very pleased to be joined with someone with such experience that has also dealt with TMA cases. And Mindy will do a presentation on the issue, and then we will open the floor for questions. So over to you, Mindy.
Thank you, Vanya. Thank you for the introduction. I'm not going to go through my introduction. I think you've seen my bio, but I still work with West Midlands Police as a detective, like a civilian detective. So I'm very, very frontline. I still work in investigation, but I lead all the cases around forced marriage and honour-based abuse. And it's interesting that this morning I've had a phone call regarding a TMA case that I advised on. So what I will do is kind of talk through some of the background around TMA, around marriages, especially in the South Asian community, and how it impacts the West Midlands, not just Birmingham, but Coventry and parts of Sandwell. We've got a very, very diverse community in Birmingham or in the West Midlands. And when we talk about TMA, it's not just South Asia. I was talking to Vanya earlier. I've had cases from Sudan, Somalia, I've had cases in the Middle East, but I would say the majority of cases are South Asian. So what kind of cases are being reported, and what is TMA? What I find from my experience is many victims, and I would say are predominantly female. We do have male victims, but many of the victims are female. They will enter into marriages. If I said the South Asian community, in say Birmingham, These marriages may well be to friends of the family. There's a go-between who's arranged the marriage, and most of these marriages are arranged; they're not forced. Some of the things you've got to bear in mind is that if you are looking in certain regions of countries, for example, northern the Kashmir region of Pakistan, the marriages could be to cousins or first cousins. So the families are very, very kind of intimately connected. So it impacts victims in the UK and victims back home as well. It impacts all the families. So you find that many of the victims will come to the UK on a spousal visa. The perpetrator, the suspect, or someone responsible for the abandonment has gone from the UK. They're a UK citizen. They go abroad. They marry the so-called victim. Then the victim will come to the UK on that spousal visa. Now, from my experience, many of these victims may not be very well educated. Even if they are educated, they will not know about many of our UK laws. So they'll come to the UK, they're on a spousal visa, and in most of the cases, they've got no recourse to public funds. So that they're solely reliant on the spouse for, for their day-to-day living. Many of the victims will also be living with extended family. So when I talk about cases and perpetrators, it's not just the husband or the wife, it's extended family as well who are responsible. And what kind of abuse is connected to TMA? One of the main offences I would say that we will associate TMA to is control and coercive behaviour. Because if you think that somebody is here on a spousal visa, if they have ended up back in their home country because they've been abandoned, there will potentially be control and coercive behaviour within that relationship, because you would need the control and coercive behaviour to actually abandon the victim, to take that victim abroad and abandon them in that country. So control and coercive behaviour would be the primary offence that we will look at any kind of criminal cases, unless the victim discloses other offences as well. It could be forced marriage, it could be other domestic violence related offences, it could even be forced marriage. But there'll be multiple perpetrators. I find that extended family, in-laws, will play a part in the control and coercive behaviour and even the abandonment abroad. So you've got to look at multiple perpetrators and not just the spouse. So what you find is that the victim will go through the visa process. They'll be granted a spouse visa. They'll come to the UK, and that spouse visa will have a time limit on it. And that victim will not have a British passport. That victim will have a passport for the country that they've come from. So let's say it could be India, it could be Pakistan, it could be Bangladesh. They are here under strict visa regulations. One of the things I see in TMA is spouses withdrawing consent to the visa. So, for example, if my victim is female and my victim is here on the spouse visa, on a husband's visa, or husband's UK passport, the husband may say to immigration, our marriage is broken down and I no longer support my victim in this relationship. What I find with that is that potentially they know that the victim may still stay in the UK. So they tend not to do that. What they tend to do is go back to the home country. And this can be through fraud. This could be where the victim's tricked. There's dishonesty. It could be, why not go back? You haven't seen your family. We'll have a holiday. And it becomes more complicated when there's children involved. So many victims who are in the UK and are victims of TMA do not know the rules and regulations of this country. And a lot of that is part of the control. The perpetrator will make sure the victim doesn't know about benefits, about bank accounts. Some victims have even said to me they don't have a GP. They've never been registered with a GP, especially if they're not married, because once they have children, that will kick in with the NHS, and being registered. So they could be living with extended family. There's a lot of control and coercive behaviour. They're not allowed out. Any phone calls they have will be monitored to family. So they're completely reliant on their spouse. It's not just perpetrators with British passports. We also have TMA when both parties are in the UK on a visa. So, for example, the husband has a work visa, could be a doctor in the UK, and his wife has come as the spouse on that visa. Now, I've had a case, and that's very, very similar. So I'm going to start off talking about that case. So my victim and her husband came to the UK from Pakistan, and her husband was a lawyer, and is a lawyer, and they gained indefinite leave. They gained that status to remain in the UK. However, my victim and the children still had Pakistani passports. So the husband arranges a family holiday back to Pakistan. They go back to Pakistan, and he says to my victim, "Why don't you go and spend some time with your family? I'll take you there, spend a few weeks with them, and then we'll fly back to the UK." Whilst my victim was with her family, the husband has returned to the UK with all of their passports, my victim's passport and the children's passports. And she reached out to West Midlands Police. So what do you do in those circumstances? The children were attending schools in Birmingham. So the first thing I did was liaise with the schools to ascertain what kind of leave they'd taken. Had they actually had permission from the school to go? And then I referred the case to Children's Services so we could hold a strap meeting regarding the children, because they were habitually living in the UK. It's not like they're just visiting from Pakistan. The other thing to remember here, and I know the forced marriage unit may have been mentioned earlier, the forced marriage unit only deal with cases of forced marriage, and they only deal with a victim who has a British passport. If a victim does not have a British passport, they're not part of our jurisdiction. So the British government will not give assistance because they're not British nationals when they're abroad. For example, I have victims of forced marriage that have, say, Dutch passports, Finnish passports, but they habitually live in the UK. If they are taken to, say, Sudan and they're being forced to marry, I will have to go to, for example, the Finnish government if their passport is from Finland, and it's the Finnish government that would offer that assistance abroad. So you've always got to look at what passport the victim holds. So in this case, they still had Pakistani passports. So I knew that the British government wouldn't offer assistance, but they could potentially offer assistance once I've actually got permission to bring them back to the UK. So I was speaking to my victim, and she said, "Look, my husband's got the passports. I don't know what to do. He's brought the passports back to the UK." I ascertained from the visa office in the UK visas, that they had valid visas for the UK, so they could return to the UK. But this was before January 2024. So I had to work with the UK visas. My victim then liaised with the Pakistani Passport Agency for their passports to be replaced. But we had to be very, very careful that her husband wasn't aware of what was happening. He was a lawyer. He had connections in Pakistan. He was educated in law in Pakistan. So what we didn't want was proceedings to start in Pakistan. For example, he could have gone to court in Pakistan and said, "I don't want my children leaving for the UK. They're Pakistani citizens." So it's very, very much done in secret. So I worked with the victim for several weeks until the passports had been replaced. Then I asked the British Embassy in Islamabad to assist me with the visas, to replace the visas in their passports. And then, without the husband finding out, we flew them back to the UK. Now, they had a private house, and it was mortgaged. So what I did with that case was that what my victim said to me was that her husband had never been violent to her or the children. There'd never been violence. There'd been control and coercive behaviour. But there was a 3-bedroom property here. So I said to my victim, "Do you think you could safely live in your house?" And she said she could. So we made a decision to arrest her husband and put bail conditions on him not to return home. So what we did with this victim is we allowed our victim and her children to go back to their marital home. Then the advice I gave her was to go to family court and to get a possession order for the property, which is what she did. She chose not to go down the criminal route with her husband, because what she said was that he was still the father of her children. But she remained in her house. Her children went back to school, and they had some normality again. And last time I checked, they were completely settled. They were no longer together. She lived in the marital home. It was a property that was owned by her husband, but she remained in her own home. So it can be challenging, but with that case, I had to involve a lot of different departments and partner agencies like Children's Services, UK Visas, the British Embassy in Islamabad, but we all kind of worked together to get this victim back to the UK. But this was before it was recognised within the Domestic Abuse Act. My second case was a victim who'd come from Pakistan. She married her first cousin in Birmingham, and she was suffering from a lot of domestic violence from her husband. She didn't disclose this until she made contact from Pakistan. So what happened was her mother-in-law said to her, "We're going to Pakistan. You haven't seen your mom since you've been in the UK. Let's go and have a holiday." She did fear that something might happen, and what you've got to bear in mind with a lot of the victims is the control is so severe that they're too scared to say anything. They will travel through an airport and not disclose what's happening to them because of fear. So she went to Pakistan, and her mother-in-law had hired a car to go to her in-laws' house. But what her mother-in-law did is she took her to her own house and said, "Go to your mother's, and I'm keeping your passport. You're not going back to the UK." And the husband was fully aware and knew exactly what his mother was doing. So she was abandoned, and she was told that her husband had already contacted UK immigration and said, "We've separated. I no longer support her on my visa." So she reached out from Pakistan. She had an uncle and aunt here that were helping. So I then started working with the uncle and aunt to see how we could get this victim back to the UK. And again, we had to be very, very cloak and dagger. The husband and mother-in-law would not find out that we were involved. So I said to her, "Do not disclose to anybody that you're speaking to the police in Birmingham, because if they find out, they'll cause issues for you in Pakistan." It's something that I was chatting to with Vanya earlier, and somebody else on the group. I've delivered a course recently to police and judges in Pakistan. Now, I've been carrying out repatriations and probably a couple of rescues from Pakistan over the last 10 years. I had a victim return 2 weeks ago from Pakistan. We've got 3 waiting to return from Pakistan. I've never, ever used or gone to the police in Pakistan. I'll let you kind of decide why I don't speak to the police in Pakistan or use the police in Pakistan. But it can put the victim in danger in certain Asian countries, including India and Bangladesh, because they're the 3 countries I work heavily with. So what I said to this victim was that, "Can you get your Pakistani passport replaced? Because it's in the UK." And I said, "How you do that is up to you. What you tell the Pakistani passport agency is up to you. But once you have a passport, I can get you back to the UK." And that's what she did. It took her about a week to replace her Pakistani passport. I then talked to UKVI, arranged for her to go to the British Embassy. She still had a year left on her spouse visa. They then replaced the visa in her new replacement passport, and I flew her back to the UK. Once she was back in the UK, she actually disclosed very, very serious offences against her husband: assault, sexual offences, and control and coercive behaviour. So he was arrested, and his mother was arrested. And the thing that angered them most was that she was back in the UK. Not that there were criminal allegations against them. It's because they'd been found out, and we managed to get this victim back to the UK. And I think many perpetrators don't realise that we can help, that we can do something. So what we did with that victim, now remember, he'd withdrawn his consent on the spousal visa. So we assisted her through charity to get a lawyer, and she was given the DV concession. And that's what she deserved. She deserved to stay in the UK and not to be abandoned abroad. And we helped as much as we can. And many victims, yes, we have charities that we will refer to, in West Midlands, but sometimes we'll reach out to national charities. There may be a local charity that can't help, so we'll reach out to national charities. So that was like another similar case. And I was saying to Ivani that I've had a case this morning where a girl has been sent back to Bangladesh and abandoned in Bangladesh. So I've gone back to the officer and I said, look, I want you to speak to the victim in Bangladesh, ask all these questions, and then we will assist her to get back to the UK. It's happening a lot. It's not a hidden harm. I think it's underreported because many victims that are abandoned don't know they can get help. They don't know that we can help to get them back. But I also think many police officers don't know we can do this. It's only because in our force we've got a very diverse community, so we have a lot more cases. But it is common, and it's not just common in South Asia. I'm seeing more prevalence in Africa, Sudan, Somalia. I'm seeing prevalence in Yemen, in the Middle East. Even Iraq, Iran. We're getting cases in many countries. We mentioned, Vanya, we were talking about Operation Limelight, and we run this operation. It should be run at every UK airport, but we run this operation at Birmingham 3 times a year, and it's around FGM and forced marriage. But in July this year, we were running the operation, and on the first day of the operation, we'd literally been set up 1 hour, and I get a phone call from a uniformed officer saying, Mindy, can you come and please see me downstairs very quickly at the check-in desk? So I speak to the officer, and it was an Indian female, and the husband was overheard at check-in saying that I'm sending her back and she's never coming back. Now, bit of not the comment to make in front of a uniformed police officer, because that victim was not going to report this. She was not going to tell the police because she was in so much fear. But because he made that comment, we got suspicious. What he'd done, his wife had come from India. She was very well educated. And once she came into the family home, because he lived with his parents, he basically said, I've got a professional job. You don't need to work. You'll have children in the future. You're staying at home. She wasn't allowed to study, wasn't allowed to work. And eventually he said, I've had enough of you. I'm sending you back to India. There were 3 family members that took her to the airport, all perpetrators, all his family. And she was that scared that even though she could see police officers, she could not disclose what was happening to her through fear. But because he made that comment, the police officer got suspicious. So I came downstairs where the check-in desks were, and I took her away from everybody, and I spoke to her on her own. And I asked her what was happening, and she told me what was happening, and she said, I've got no choice. I've got to go back to India. I've already called my dad in Delhi, and my dad sent a friend to the airport just to give me some moral support and just to make sure I leave, without anything happening to me. So I asked her one very, very simple question. Do you want to leave or do you want to stay in the UK? And she said, if I had a choice, I would stay in the UK, but not with my husband. So I said to her, that luggage is going no further. You're not getting on that flight, because once you get on that flight, you may never come back. So she then disclosed the criminal offences to us, and he was arrested at the airport and taken into custody. We safeguarded the victim, and then again, we got her into refuge. She had no recourse to public funds. She got legal advice. It was a genuine case, and she's gone down the road to the route of a DV concession. It just shows that like she was literally about to catch a flight and about to leave the country. So they're the kind of cases that we're dealing with. Many victims are coming to us once they're already abroad, once they're already abandoned. That's because they don't know it's going to happen to them. They don't know they're going to be abandoned. And what I would say is that if the awareness was there, maybe some victims probably would contact the police before they're taken out of the country. But what you're not going to stop is when they're tricked or there's fraud involved, because perpetrators can be very, very clever. And you know, the levels of control and coercive behaviour can be very, very high. So we know what it is, and I've gone through some cases. And what I actually wanted was people to ask me questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability around the cases I deal with, because I also find it's very, very closely linked to honour-based abuse as well. Because if families find out, or families are kind of caught, there is shame and dishonour involved in what's happened within that family circle, especially when my victim and my perpetrator is related to each other. There can be big fallouts amongst the families back home in the country and in the UK, which can cause issues around safeguarding our victims as well.